I woke up that Tuesday morning to the sound of concrete grinding against metal, and by the time I threw on pants and stumbled outside, the damage was already done. My driveway gate 8, the automatic sliding one I'd installed just 3 months ago for $2,200, was completely inoperable because someone had filled the tracks with fresh cement. Not just a little bit either. The entire length of both tracks, maybe 15 feet on each side, was packed solid with quick-setting concrete that was already starting to harden in the early Phoenix sun. Standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and a satisfied expression plastered across her face was Brenda Morrison, the president of our Saguaro Heights HOA and the most insufferable woman I'd ever had the misfortune of meeting. She was wearing one of her trademark beige pantsuits despite the fact that it was barely 7 in the morning, and her short blonde hair was styled in that aggressive soccer mom cut that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." "Good morning, Henry," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I see you've discovered the community improvement we made to your property." I stared at her, then at the ruined tracks, then back at her. My brain was still catching up to what I was seeing. "You poured cement into my gate tracks. The HOA board voted last night on an emergency measure. Your gate violates Code Section 17.4, subsection B, which clearly states that no homeowner may install permanent fixtures that alter the visual continuity of the streetscape without board approval. I got approval. I submitted the request 4 months ago and it was approved. I have the email." Brenda's smile tightened. "That approval was issued in error. The board has since reviewed the matter and determined that your gate creates an elitist atmosphere that's inconsistent with our community values. We're correcting the mistake." I rubbed my face, trying to maintain some semblance of calm. I'd only lived in this Phoenix suburb for 8 months, having moved here from Seattle for work. I was a software engineer for a telecommunications company, and the job paid well enough that I'd been able to buy a decent house in what I thought was a nice neighborhood. The gate had been installed because my backyard opened onto a community greenbelt where people like to cut through, and I'd had issues with folks letting their dogs use my yard as a bathroom. The gate was a simple solution, approved by the HOA, installed professionally, and completely legal, or so I thought.
"You can't just destroy my property, Brenda. That's vandalism. That's a crime."
The HOA has broad authority to maintain community standards. You'll find that clearly outlined in the CC and Rs you signed when you purchased your home. The cement will be left to cure, and you'll need to remove the gate structure by Friday, or we'll fine you $200 per day. She turned and walked away before I could respond, her sensible pumps clicking against the sidewalk. I stood there in my driveway, barefoot and furious, staring at what was probably $8,000 worth of damage when you factored in the track replacement, the gate reprogramming, the concrete removal, and all the labor costs. I called my lawyer before I even went back inside. Marcus Chen had handled my house closing, and while real estate law wasn't quite the same as HOA disputes, he was the only attorney I knew in Phoenix. His secretary put me through after I explained it was an emergency, and Marcus listened patiently while I laid out the whole situation. "Did you document the damage?" he asked. "I'm about to. I wanted to call you first before I touched anything good. Take photos, videos, everything, timestamp them. Then call the police and file a report. Even if they won't do anything about it right now, you want that paper trail. Do you have the original HOA approval for the gate?" "Yeah. It's in my email. Forward it to me. Also send me your CCN, the HOA bylaws, and any other documentation you have. I need to see what authority they actually have here." I spent the next hour documenting everything. Photos from every angle, a video walkthrough, close-ups of the cement in the tracks. I even got footage of the empty cement bags that had been left in the garbage bin at the community clubhouse, which was only 100 feet from my house. The bags still had receipt stickers on them from a local hardware store, and the timestamp showed they'd been purchased yesterday evening at 6:43 p.m. The police were less helpful than I'd hoped. The officer who responded, a tired-looking guy named Patterson, took my statement and looked at the damage, but he seemed skeptical about the whole thing. "So the HOA president admitted to doing this?" She called it a community improvement. She was standing right here when I came outside. "But you didn't actually see her pour the cement?" "No, but who else would it be? She literally told me the board voted on it last night." Officer Patterson sighed and made some notes. "Look, Mr. Thompson, I'm going to file this report, but I'll be honest with you. This is going to be treated as a civil matter, not criminal. HOAs have a lot of legal protection in Arizona, and unless you can prove she did this without any board authorization, it's going to be hard to make a criminal case stick. She destroyed my property. She says she was enforcing HOA regulations. That's a contract dispute, not vandalism. My advice? Get a lawyer and take it to civil court. You'll have better luck there." He left and I was back to square one. I called a gate repair company and got someone to come out that afternoon for an estimate. The technician, a Hispanic guy in his 50s named Roberto, whistled low when he saw the damage. Man, somebody really wanted this gate gone. You make enemies or something? Ah! He nodded like that, explained everything. Yeah, I've seen some crazy stuff from HOAs. Never seen one pour cement in the tracks, though. That's a new one. He spent 20 minutes examining everything, taking measurements and checking the gate mechanism itself. Finally, he pulled out his tablet and started tapping numbers. Okay, so here's the situation. The tracks are completely shot. That cement is already cured enough that it's bonded to the metal, so we can't just chip it out. We're going to have to remove the entire track system and install new ones. That's parts and labor. Then we need to reprogram the gate motor because disconnecting everything is going to reset it. And we should probably do a full inspection of the motor itself because if anyone tried to open this gate after the cement was poured, it could have damaged the drive system. How much? Parts alone are going to be around $3,000. Labor's probably another 4, maybe 4.5. Call it $8,000 total, give or take. I felt my stomach drop. $8,000. I can try to get you a better price on the parts, but yeah, that's the ballpark. This is specialty equipment and it's not cheap. Plus, we're talking about at least 2 full days of work, maybe 3. I thanked him and told him I'd be in touch. Then I called Marcus again. $8,000, I said when he answered. That's the repair estimate. Send it to me. I'm going through the HOA documents you forwarded. And Henry, I've got some interesting news. The CC&Rs do give the HOA authority to enforce architectural standards, but there's a very specific process they have to follow. They need to provide written notice, allow a 30-day cure period, and only then can they take action. And even then, their action is limited to fines and liens. There's nothing in here that gives them the authority to physically alter or damage your property. So what she did was illegal. In my opinion, yes. She may have authority to fine you or even put a lien on your house, but she doesn't have the right to destroy your gate. That's conversion, possibly trespassing, and definitely tortious interference with your property rights. Can we sue? Absolutely. I'd recommend we start with a demand letter. We'll outline the damages, cite the relevant law, and give them 10 days to pay for repairs. If they refuse, we file in Superior Court. With the evidence you've gathered and the repair estimate, this should be pretty straightforward. What about criminal charges? That's trickier. The police report helps, but like Officer Patterson said, they're probably going to treat this as civil. However, if we can show that Brenda acted outside her authority as HOA president, we might be able to argue that she committed criminal damage to property. That's a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona, maybe even a felony if the damage exceeds $5,000. The estimate is $8,000. Then we're in felony territory. Let me draft the demand letter, and let's see how they respond. In the meantime, don't touch the gate or the cement. Leave everything exactly as it is until we've exhausted the legal options. The next morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my front door. It was on official HOA letterhead, signed by Brenda Morrison, and it informed me that I was in violation of community standards. The gate needed to be removed by end of business Friday, or I'd be fined $200 per day starting Saturday. There was no mention of the cement, the damage, or any acknowledgement that the HOA had done anything wrong. I photographed the notice and sent it to Marcus, who called me back within an hour. This is actually helpful, he said. She's doubling down, which means she either doesn't understand the legal exposure she's creating, or she thinks the HOA's insurance will cover her. Either way, we can use this. I'm going to have the demand letter ready by end of day, and we'll send it certified mail and email. That should get someone's attention. The demand letter went out Thursday morning. It was 3 pages of legal language that basically boiled down to, pay $8,000 for repairs within 10 days, or we're suing you personally and the HOA for damages, attorney fees, and punitive damages. Marcus had itemized everything: the track replacement, the gate reprogramming, the labor costs, even the cost of the police report and the documentation I'd done. Brenda's response arrived Friday afternoon. It was a single-paragraph email that said the HOA denied all liability, maintained that they had acted within their authority, and suggested that I remove the gate as directed or face escalating fines. She's an idiot, Marcus said when I forwarded him the email. She's creating a perfect paper trail for us. Go ahead and get the gate repaired. I'll file the lawsuit Monday morning. I called Roberto and scheduled the repair work for the following week. Then I spent the weekend gathering every piece of documentation I could find. The original gate approval, the purchase receipts, the installation contract, everything. I also started digging into the HOA bylaws more carefully, and I found something interesting. According to the bylaws, any emergency vote by the board required a quorum of at least 5 members and had to be documented in meeting minutes that were distributed to all homeowners within 48 hours. I checked my email, checked the HOA website, even checked my physical mailbox. There were no meeting minutes, no documentation of any vote, nothing. I called Marcus with this information. That's huge, he said. If there was no proper vote, then Brenda acted unilaterally, which means this wasn't an HOA action at all. This was just her personally destroying your property. That changes everything. It means the HOA might not even defend her. They could throw her under the bus to avoid liability. What do? I'm going to amend the lawsuit before we file. We'll name both Brenda personally and the HOA as defendants, but we'll make it very clear that if the HOA can't produce documentation of a proper vote, Brenda's on her own. That should motivate the HOA board to cooperate with us instead of protecting her. Monday morning, Marcus filed the lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. By Monday afternoon, I had a panicked voicemail from another HOA board member, a guy named Keith Sterling who I'd met once at a community barbecue. "Henry, this is Keith Sterling from the HOA board. I just heard about the lawsuit and I need to talk to you as soon as possible. This is a mess, and I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. Please call me back." I forwarded the voicemail to Marcus before returning the call. He advised me to be polite but noncommittal, and to record the conversation if Arizona law allowed it. I checked. Arizona is a one-party consent state, so I was good. "Keith, it's Henry Thompson. Got your message. Henry, thank you for calling back. Look, I just found out what happened with your gate, and I'm honestly shocked. The board never voted on any emergency measure. Brenda called me Tuesday night and said she'd handled a code violation at your property, but she never mentioned pouring cement or any of this." "When did this happen?" "Tuesday morning. I woke up to find the tracks filled with concrete, and Brenda was standing on the sidewalk saying the board had voted the night before." "We didn't vote on anything. I mean, we had a regular board meeting Monday night, but your gate wasn't even on the agenda." Brenda mentioned it in passing, said she thought the approval had been issued incorrectly, but we didn't take any action. She definitely didn't have authority to do what she did. "Do you have meeting minutes from Monday?" "Yeah, I take the minutes. I can send them to you. Your gate isn't mentioned anywhere except in Brenda's president's report, and even there it's just a note that she was reviewing architectural approvals." "Keith, I appreciate the call, but I've already filed a lawsuit. My lawyer needs to be involved in any further communication." "I understand. Look, between you and me, I think Brenda went rogue on this. The rest of the board is pretty upset. We're meeting tomorrow night to discuss what happened, and there's going to be a vote on whether to remove her as president. I just wanted you to know that the HOA itself isn't your enemy here. This was Brenda acting on her own." I thanked him and ended the call, then immediately called Marcus to fill him in. "Perfect," Marcus said. "The HOA is distancing themselves from Brenda, which means our strategy is working. They'll probably try to settle quickly to avoid the publicity and legal fees. But more importantly, if Brenda acted without board authorization, we've got a much stronger case for criminal charges. I'm going to reach out to the county attorney's office and see if they'll take another look at this." Tuesday evening, I got an email from Keith with the meeting minutes attached. Just as he'd said, there was no vote, no authorization, nothing that would justify what Brenda had done. The minutes showed that she'd mentioned reviewing architectural approvals, but that was it. No discussion, no motion, no vote. I also received a certified letter that same day from an attorney representing Brenda personally. The letter claimed that I was harassing her, that my lawsuit was frivolous, and that she would be filing a countersuit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Marcus laughed when I showed him. "That's a desperate move. She's trying to scare you off, but it's not going to work. Defamation requires a false statement, and everything we've alleged is true and documented. And emotional distress? Please. She destroyed your property and is mad that you're holding her accountable. No judge is going to take that seriously." The gate repairs started Wednesday morning. Roberto and his crew showed up at 7 a.m. with a truck full of equipment and got to work. The first day was all demolition, removing the cemented tracks and hauling away the debris. It was noisy, messy work, and I could see neighbors coming out to watch. Several of them stopped by to ask what was going on, and I gave them the short version. By Thursday afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood. I started getting texts and calls from people I barely knew, all expressing support and sharing their own horror stories about Brenda. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. One neighbor, a woman named Patricia who lived 3 doors down, stopped by while Roberto's crew was installing the new tracks. "I wanted to tell you I'm glad you're standing up to her," Patricia said. 2 years ago, Brenda tried to fine me $500 because my mailbox was the wrong shade of white. Not a different color, just a slightly different shade of the approved white. I had to repaint it 3 times before she approved it. That's insane. That's Brenda. She's been on a power trip since she became president. Half the neighborhood is terrified of her. The other half just avoids her. Well, hopefully this will change things. I hope so. A bunch of us are planning to show up at the next board meeting. We want her removed. Friday morning, the gate repairs were finished. Roberto tested the system thoroughly, making sure everything worked perfectly. The new tracks were actually an upgrade from the originals, made from a more durable alloy that was less likely to corrode in the Arizona heat. The gate slid smoothly, the motor was quiet, and everything was programmed correctly. "Good as new," Roberto said, handing me the invoice. "Actually, better than new. These tracks should last you 20 years easy." The total came to $8,100. I paid it, got a receipt with everything itemized, and forwarded it all to Marcus. "Now we wait," Marcus said. "The HOA has to respond to the lawsuit within 20 days. Brenda has 30 days because we're suing her individually as well. My guess is we'll hear from the HOA's insurance company within a week. They're going to want to settle." He was right. 5 days later, I got a call from an adjuster with the HOA's liability insurance company. The adjuster, a pleasant woman named Rachel, explained that they'd reviewed the claim and were prepared to offer a settlement. "We're willing to pay the full repair cost of $8,100, plus your attorney fees up to this point, which we estimate at around $1,500. In exchange, you'd sign a release agreeing not to pursue any further claims against the HOA. What about Brenda? The release would only cover the HOA as an entity. You'd still be free to pursue your individual claim against Mrs. Morrison." I told her I needed to discuss it with my lawyer and would get back to her. Marcus advised accepting the offer. "It's a good settlement," he said. "You get made whole on the repairs, you get your attorney fees covered, and you don't have to go through a long court battle with the HOA. Plus, you can still go after Brenda personally, which is what this is really about." What happens with the criminal case? I spoke with someone at the county attorney's office yesterday. They're reviewing the evidence, and with the new information about Brenda acting without board authority, they're considering filing charges. It's not a guarantee, but it's looking more likely. I accepted the settlement offer the next day. The insurance company cut a check for $9,600, which covered the repairs and Marcus's fees to date. The HOA also agreed to send a letter to all homeowners clarifying that my gate had been properly approved and that the actions taken against it were unauthorized. But I wasn't done with Brenda. Marcus amended the lawsuit to focus exclusively on Brenda Morrison as an individual. We were seeking the original $8,100 in damages, since I was using the insurance money to pay myself back for what I'd already spent, plus punitive damages, attorney fees, and costs. In Arizona, punitive damages can be substantial if you can show that the defendant acted with evil mind or reckless disregard for the rights of others. Brenda's attorney tried to get the case dismissed, arguing that she'd been acting in her capacity as HOA president and therefore had immunity. The judge rejected that argument in a written order that Marcus read to me over the phone. The court finds that the defendant's actions were not authorized by the HOA board and exceeded any authority granted to her as president. Furthermore, the deliberate destruction of plaintiff's property constitutes reckless disregard for the plaintiff's rights. The motion to dismiss is denied. The judge also noted that the case had potential criminal implications and was forwarding the file to the county attorney's office for review. 2 weeks later, I got a call from an investigator with the county attorney's office. She asked me to come in and give a statement, which I did. I brought all my documentation, walked through the timeline, and explained how Brenda had admitted to authorizing the cement but couldn't produce any evidence of board approval. "Mr. Thompson, I want to be straight with you," the investigator said. "This case is borderline. The damage amount puts it in felony territory, but proving criminal intent is always tricky, especially when the defendant can argue she thought she was acting within her authority. She lied about the board vote. She says she misspoke, that she believed the board would have approved her actions if they'd voted. It's a weak defense, but it creates reasonable doubt. So nothing's going to happen?" I didn't say that. "We're considering a misdemeanor charge of criminal damage to property. That's a Class 1 misdemeanor, punishable by up to 6 months in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. It's not as serious as the felony charge, but it's still a criminal conviction, and it carries real consequences." "What do you need from me?" "Just stay available. If we decide to file charges, we'll need you to testify before a grand jury or at a preliminary hearing." The civil case proceeded through discovery. Marcus subpoenaed Brenda's emails, text messages, and phone records. What we found was damning. 3 weeks before the incident, Brenda had emailed another board member saying that she was tired of Henry Thompson, thinking he's better than everyone else with his fancy gate. 2 days before the cement incident, she'd texted her husband saying she was going to teach that Silicon Valley snob a lesson. Most damning of all, we found receipts showing that Brenda had personally purchased the cement, using her own credit card. The purchases were made at 6:43 p.m. on Monday evening, just hours after the board meeting where my gate wasn't even discussed. Marcus filed a motion for summary judgment on liability, arguing that there was no genuine dispute about the material facts. Brenda had destroyed my property without authorization using her own money and had made statements showing she acted out of personal animus rather than any legitimate HOA purpose. The judge agreed. In a ruling issued 3 months after the incident, the court found Brenda liable for damages and set a hearing to determine the amount. The damages hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September. Marcus and I arrived at the courthouse early, and I was surprised to see a decent crowd in the gallery. Several of my neighbors had shown up, along with some people I didn't recognize. Keith Sterling was there, representing the HOA in an observer capacity. Brenda arrived with her attorney, a nervous-looking young guy who seemed overwhelmed by the whole situation. She looked older than I remembered, worn down by the stress of the lawsuit and the ongoing criminal investigation. The hearing took about 2 hours. Marcus presented the repair bills, walked through the evidence of Brenda's personal animosity, and argued for substantial punitive damages. Your Honor, this isn't a case where someone made an honest mistake or acted in good faith. The evidence shows that Ms. Morrison deliberately destroyed my client's property because she didn't like him. She lied about board authorization. She used her position as HOA president as cover for what was really a personal vendetta, and she's shown no remorse. Punitive damages are appropriate to punish this conduct and deter others from abusing their authority in similar ways. Brenda's attorney argued that she'd already been punished enough, that she'd lost her position as HOA president, that the stress of the lawsuit had affected her health, and that she'd acted out of a misguided belief that she was helping the community. The judge wasn't buying it.
Mems.
Morrison, I've reviewed the evidence in this case carefully, and I find your conduct to be truly egregious. You destroyed Mr. Thompson's property out of personal spite, then attempted to use your position of authority to justify your actions. This is exactly the kind of abuse of power that punitive damages are designed to address. The judge awarded me the full $8,100 in compensatory damages plus $25,000 in punitive damages, plus attorney fees and costs. The total judgment came to just over $40,000. Brenda went pale when she heard the amount. Her attorney asked for time to file a motion for reconsideration, but the judge denied the request. The judgment is entered as stated. Ms. Morrison, you have 30 days to file an appeal, but I'll warn you that the evidence in this case is overwhelming. I'd strongly encourage you to satisfy this judgment rather than spending more money on legal fees for an appeal you're unlikely to win. As we were leaving the courtroom, Keith Sterling caught up with me in the hallway. Henry, I just want to apologize on behalf of the HOA. What Brenda did was inexcusable, and the board is committed to making sure nothing like this ever happens again. We've completely revised our architectural review process, and we've implemented new checks and balances to prevent any single board member from having this kind of unchecked authority. I appreciate that, Keith. Also, the board voted last night to reimburse you for any out-of-pocket costs that weren't covered by the insurance settlement. I know you've spent a lot of time and energy on this, and it's the least we can do. That's generous. Thank you. We shook hands, and I left the courthouse feeling vindicated but also exhausted. The whole ordeal had taken 5 months, and while I'd won, it had cost me a lot of stress and anxiety. The criminal case came to a conclusion a few weeks later. The county attorney's office decided to file misdemeanor charges against Brenda for criminal damage to property. Rather than go to trial, Brenda accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor charge and was sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation, a $1,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service. The judge also ordered her to pay restitution, though that was redundant since I'd already won the civil judgment. The sentencing hearing was brief. Brenda stood before the judge and apologized, though it felt more like something her attorney had told her to say rather than genuine remorse. Your Honor, I accept responsibility for my actions. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry for the harm I caused Mr. Thompson. I was under a lot of stress at the time, and I let my emotions get the best of me. I'm committed to making things right and learning from this experience. The judge seemed skeptical but accepted the plea agreement. Mrs. Morrison, I want to be clear that this conviction will remain on your record. You've abused a position of trust and authority, and there are consequences for that. I expect you to complete every requirement of your probation to the letter. If you violate any terms, you'll be facing jail time. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. And that was it. Brenda walked out of the courthouse a convicted criminal, on probation, and owing me $40,000. Collecting the judgment turned out to be its own challenge. Brenda claimed she didn't have the money to pay, so Marcus filed a judgment lien against her house. She tried to hide assets, transferring money to her husband and adult children, but Marcus caught it and filed a motion for contempt. The judge ordered her to pay $5,000 immediately or face jail time, which motivated her to suddenly find the money. Over the following months, Brenda made payments on the judgment, usually after Marcus threatened her with garnishment or other collection actions. It was slow going, but the money came in. By the end of the year, she'd paid about half of what she owed. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The HOA elected a new president, a retired accountant named Dorothy, who ran on a platform of transparency and common sense. One of her first acts was to issue a formal apology to me and to establish a grievance process for homeowners who felt they'd been treated unfairly. I got to know my neighbors better through the whole ordeal. Several of them became friends, and we formed an informal group to keep an eye on HOA decisions and make sure nothing like the Brenda situation happened again. My gate worked perfectly, the new tracks gleaming in the Arizona sun. Every time I drove through it, I thought about how something as simple as a driveway gate had turned into a months-long legal battle. But I also felt satisfied knowing that I'd stood up for myself and held someone accountable for their actions. About 9 months after the incident, I was working from home when I heard a knock at the door. It was Brenda, looking tired and defeated. She was alone, no attorney with her. "Henry, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I wanted to talk to you." I considered closing the door, but curiosity got the better of me. I've been in therapy since all this happened. My therapist has helped me understand that I was dealing with a lot of unresolved issues, and I was taking them out on other people. That doesn't excuse what I did to you, but it helps me understand it. Okay, I want to genuinely apologize. Not the court-ordered apology, but a real one. What I did was cruel and stupid and wrong. I destroyed your property because I was jealous and angry and feeling like my life was out of control. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm truly sorry. I looked at her for a long moment. She seemed sincere, and I could see that the past year had taken a toll on her. But I also remembered waking up to find my gate destroyed, remembered her smug expression as she told me it was a community improvement, remembered all the stress and expense and time I'd invested in holding her accountable. I appreciate the apology, Brenda. I do. But I need you to understand something. What you did wasn't just destructive to my property. It was a violation of trust. You were in a position of authority and you abused it. You made people in this neighborhood afraid to stand up to you. That's not okay. I know. I'm working on being a better person. I've resigned from the HOA board completely and I'm focusing on my own issues. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong and I'm sorry. She left and I closed the door. I didn't know if her apology was genuine or just another manipulation, and honestly, I didn't care. The situation was resolved. I had my gate, I had my judgment, and Brenda had faced consequences for her actions. Over the next few months, Brenda continued making payments on the judgment. Marcus kept the pressure on, and by the spring of the following year, the entire $40,000 had been paid. Marcus sent me a final accounting, showing every payment, every fee, every cost. When it was all tallied up, I'd actually come out slightly ahead after accounting for the insurance settlement and the judgment. The criminal probation case wrapped up around the same time. Brenda completed her community service, working at a local food bank and homeless shelter. She paid her fine, met with her probation officer regularly, and apparently stayed out of trouble. A year after her sentencing, her probation was terminated and the case was closed. I never had another problem with the HOA. Dorothy ran the organization efficiently and fairly, and the new architectural review process actually worked well. I submitted a request to install solar panels the following summer, and it was approved within 2 weeks with no drama. The neighborhood changed too. People seemed more willing to speak up at board meetings, to question decisions, to hold the leadership accountable. The Brenda situation had been a wake-up call for a lot of folks, a reminder that HOAs can do a lot of good but also a lot of harm when the wrong person is in charge. I stayed in touch with Marcus, who became something of a friend through the whole ordeal. He told me that my case had actually led to some changes in how HOA disputes were handled in Arizona. Several state legislators had taken an interest, and there was talk of reforming HOA laws to provide more protection for homeowners and clearer limits on HOA authority. 2 years after the cement incident, I was sitting on my back patio on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading the news on my tablet, when I got a notification that my gate was opening. I glanced at my phone to check the security camera, expecting to see a delivery truck or maybe a neighbor who'd accidentally triggered the sensor. Instead, I saw a moving truck pulling into Brenda's driveway across the street and 3 houses down. Over the next few hours, I watched as movers loaded furniture and boxes, and by evening, the house was empty. A for sale sign went up the following Monday. I never saw Brenda again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had moved to Tucson, wanting a fresh start away from the memories and the judgment. The house sold within a month to a young couple with 2 kids, and they were friendly, normal neighbors who never caused any problems. Life moved on. My gate continued to work perfectly, sliding open and closed dozens of times a day without issue. The tracks that had cost $8,000 to replace lasted years without needing any maintenance. Just as Roberto had promised, looking back on the whole experience, I realized it had taught me some important lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I hadn't photographed the damage, saved the emails, recorded the conversations, I might not have had enough evidence to win. Second, standing up to bullies is worth it, even when it's expensive and stressful. Brenda had terrorized that neighborhood for years, and someone needed to hold her accountable. Third, the legal system actually works sometimes. It's slow, it's frustrating, it's expensive, but justice can prevail if you're patient and persistent. I also learned something about myself. I'd always been conflict-averse, the kind of person who'd rather walk away than fight. But when Brenda poured that cement, something in me snapped. I wasn't going to be pushed around. I wasn't going to let someone destroy my property and get away with it. The whole experience was empowering in a way I hadn't expected. 3 years after the incident, I was promoted at work and got a significant raise. I used some of the money to upgrade my gate system, adding a fancy intercom and camera system that integrated with my phone. Every time I pulled into my driveway and watched that gate slide open smoothly on its tracks, the tracks that had been destroyed and replaced at such great cost, I felt a sense of satisfaction. The HOA under Dorothy's leadership became a model for other communities in the area. She invited me to serve on the architectural review committee, and I accepted. It felt good to be part of the solution, to help create a process that was fair and transparent and actually served the homeowners, rather than giving board members an excuse to abuse their authority. I ran into Keith Sterling at the grocery store one afternoon, and we chatted for a few minutes. He told me that several other HOAs in the Phoenix area had reached out to learn about the reforms we'd implemented, and that our bylaws were being used as a template by other communities. You know, what Brenda did was terrible, but in a weird way it led to a lot of positive changes, Keith said. People are more engaged now. They pay attention to what the board is doing. We have better checks and balances. It's actually made the neighborhood stronger. I guess that's one way to look at it, I said. I'm serious. You could have just let it go, could have eaten the cost and moved on. But you stood up and fought back, and it made a difference. So thank you. I appreciated the sentiment, but I couldn't help thinking about all the stress and anxiety and lost time. The depositions, the court appearances, the endless emails with Marcus, the sleepless nights worrying about whether I'd win or lose. It had taken a toll, even if things had ultimately worked out. But Keith was right that good things had come from it. The neighborhood was better. The HOA was better, and I was better too, more confident, more willing to stand up for myself, more aware of my rights as a homeowner and a citizen. 4 years after the cement incident, I was contacted by a local news reporter who was doing a story on HOA abuses. She'd heard about my case and wanted to interview me. I agreed, and the story ran on the evening news and online. It was surreal seeing myself on television talking about that morning when I'd walked outside to find my gate tracks filled with cement. The story generated a lot of responses. I got emails and messages from people all over Arizona, and even from other states, sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were worse than mine, people who'd lost their homes over trivial violations, families who'd been bankrupted by legal fees fighting unjust fines. It made me realize that while my situation had been bad, I'd actually been lucky in a lot of ways. I had the resources to fight back, the documentation to prove my case, and a lawyer who knew what he was doing. The reporter asked me what advice I'd give to other homeowners dealing with HOA problems. Document everything, I said. Take photos, save emails. Record conversations if your state allows it. Don't assume that because something is wrong, someone will make it right. You have to be your own advocate. And don't be afraid to stand up to people even if they're in positions of authority. Authority doesn't give anyone the right to abuse you or destroy your property. The story had an unexpected consequence. A state legislator saw it and reached out to me. She was working on a bill to reform HOA laws in Arizona, and she wanted my input. I met with her and her staff, walked them through what had happened, explained the gaps in the existing law that had allowed Brenda to act with such impunity. Some of my suggestions made it into the bill. New requirements for board training, stronger documentation requirements for enforcement actions, clearer limits on what HOAs could and couldn't do, and better protection for homeowners who challenged HOA decisions. The bill passed the following year, and while it wasn't perfect, it was a step in the right direction. 5 years after the cement incident, I found myself thinking about it less and less. It had become just another story, something that had happened to me once, a crazy situation that had worked out okay in the end. My gate still worked perfectly. The neighborhood was peaceful. The HOA functioned well under competent leadership. I dated someone for a while, a woman I met through work, and when she asked why I had such a fancy gate system, I told her the whole story. She was horrified and impressed in equal measure. You sued the HOA president and won $40,000? Technically, I sued her personally. The HOA paid for the repairs through their insurance. Still, that's incredible. Most people would have just eaten the cost and moved on. I thought about it. But it was the principle of the thing, she destroyed my property because she didn't like me. That's not okay. We broke up eventually for unrelated reasons, but the relationship helped me realize that I'd moved on from the whole Brenda situation. It was part of my history, but it wasn't defining my present anymore. 6 years after the incident, I was working in my garage on a Saturday when a car pulled up. An older couple got out and approached me hesitantly. "Are you Henry Thompson?" the man asked. "I am. I'm sorry to bother you, but we just bought a house in a neighborhood in Tempe and we're having some problems with our HOA. Someone told us about what happened with your gate, and we were wondering if you could give us some advice." I invited them into my kitchen and made coffee while they explained their situation. Their HOA was fining them for parking a work truck in their driveway, claiming it violated community standards. They'd tried to fight it but were getting nowhere. I spent an hour talking them through the process, explaining their rights, recommending Marcus Chen as an attorney, and sharing the lessons I'd learned. When they left, they thanked me profusely, and I felt good knowing that my experience might help someone else. Over the next few years, I heard from several other people in similar situations. Word had spread somehow, maybe through the news story or just through the community grapevine, that I was someone who'd successfully fought an HOA and won. I became an informal resource for folks dealing with similar problems, offering advice and encouragement and attorney referrals. It felt like the whole nightmare with Brenda had come full circle. What had started as a malicious act of vandalism had ultimately led to positive changes, not just for me but for other people in other neighborhoods dealing with their own HOA nightmares. 10 years after the cement incident, I was still living in the same house in Saguaro Heights. The gate that had caused so much trouble still worked perfectly, the motor running smoothly, the tracks sliding effortlessly. I'd long since paid off the judgment money, invested it, and watched it grow. In a weird way, Brenda's vindictiveness had become a financial windfall. I never saw or heard from Brenda again after she moved away. I didn't know if she'd rebuilt her life, if she'd learned from her mistakes, if she'd ever truly understood the harm she'd caused. Part of me hoped she had, that she'd become a better person. But mostly I just didn't think about her anymore. The neighborhood had changed over the years. Some families had moved away, new ones had moved in. Dorothy had stepped down as HOA president eventually, replaced by a competent young engineer named Thomas who continued her legacy of fair and transparent leadership. The reforms we'd implemented had become standard practice, and newer residents had no idea how bad things had been under Brenda's reign. I'd served on the Architectural Review Committee for several years before stepping down, satisfied that the process was working well and that my contribution had been valuable. I'd made real friends in the neighborhood, people who'd supported me during the lawsuit and who I'd supported through their own challenges. Looking back on the whole experience from a decade's distance, I realized that it had fundamentally changed me. I was more assertive, more confident, more willing to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult or expensive. I'd learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, could deliver justice if you had the patience and resources to see it through. I'd learned that documentation and evidence were more powerful than anger or outrage, and I'd learned that standing up to bullies, even when it cost time and money and stress, was worth it. The gate continued to slide open and close, day after day, year after year, a testament to the fact that I'd refused to be pushed around. Every time I drove through it, I felt a small surge of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some legal battle, but because I'd stood my ground. I'd refused to let someone destroy my property and get away with it. I'd held a powerful person accountable for her actions. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the money, not the judgment, not even the criminal conviction. What mattered was that I'd stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. I'd fought back when it would have been simpler to accept the loss. I'd demanded accountability when others would have shrugged and moved on. The tracks that Brenda had filled with cement were long gone, replaced by better ones that would outlast my ownership of the house. But the memory of that morning, walking outside to find my property destroyed and a smugly satisfied HOA president waiting to gloat, would stay with me forever. Not as a source of anger or resentment, but as a reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem against you. The $8,000 repair bill that I'd billed Brenda Morrison had turned into a $40,000 judgment and, more importantly, into a victory for accountability and justice. It had been a long road, full of stress and uncertainty and frustration. But I'd traveled it, and I'd come out the other side stronger for the experience. My gate worked perfectly, and life was good.